What's going on, everybody? We have some Bitcoin news to talk about. And first off, we have news today that Blackrock is setting up an ETP, which is essentially a more broad term for an ETF, in Europe. And this fund is expected to be based in Switzerland more specifically, with Blackrock beginning marketing as early as this month. And this isn't their first international move. They've already launched spot Bitcoin ETFs in both Canada and Brazil. And even Bloomberg is pointing it out, that Blackrock's Bitcoin ETF has become the greatest launch in history of ETFs, with BlackRock's IBIT growing to more than $50 billion in assets in about a year. And speaking of ETFs, let's see what the spot Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs have been posting recently. Well, Ethereum ETFs logged their third largest inflow, and US spot Ethereum ETFs now hold $10 billion in net assets, or about 3% of ETH's total market cap, with the US spot Bitcoin ETFs commanding $116 billion in Bitcoin, or almost 6% of its market cap. And yes, this is their third largest day of inflows since their launch. It seems like while there is still outflow pressure likely from the ETH Grayscale fund, we have been seeing more and more inflows, especially when you compare it to when the Ethereum spot ETFs first launched. Now, as for the Bitcoin ETFs, they pulled in $340 million in net inflows on February 4, and BlackRock's IBIT pulled in the majority of that, pulling in $294 million in net inflows, bringing their total net inflows to $40 billion. And they alone hold almost 3% of Bitcoin's market cap, or about $57 billion in net assets. You might be asking, why is this $57 billion, but the inflows are only $40 billion? The increase in price of Bitcoin since the ETFs went live makes up for that difference. And interestingly, we've had the second day in a row of the Grayscale spot Bitcoin ETF seeing inflows. I believe the selling pressure for the most part from Grayscale is well behind us, and we've seen almost $22 billion exit the fund. Despite that, we've still seen overall net massive inflows from these Bitcoin ETFs as a whole. All right, now I want to move over to this David Sachs news. People are pretty disappointed. After this conference, Bitcoin did start selling off a bit when there wasn't any clear groundwork laid out for a strategic Bitcoin reserve. I think part of the market's lack of excitement is just their wording. They say that they're going to review a strategic Bitcoin reserve rather than being assertive like we typically see from this administration with executive orders now. No, wait, we want this done now. It's kind of funny to see them saying that they're going to review a strategic Bitcoin reserve and not just say that they're going to start one. But let's listen to this clip.
One of the things that the president instructed us to do was to evaluate the idea for a Bitcoin reserve, and so that is one of the things. That's one of the first things we're going to look at as part of the internal working group in the administration. So as soon as we get all that set up, we're still waiting for some cabinet secretaries who are on the working group to get confirmed. So we're still in the very early stages of this. But that's one of the first things we're gonna look at is the feasibility of a Bitcoin reserve. I think the concept of the sovereign wealth fund is a little separate, and you'd have to talk to Secretary Lutnick, or soon to be Secretary Lutnick, about that.
No, I think because there wasn't any clear groundwork laid out, there wasn't any actual progression. I think the market sold off a little bit, or just took advantage of buy the rumor, sell the news, with Bitcoin recently posting some gains coming up to this event. Now, whether this is something that's going to be in play or not, it's anybody's guess. No one knows the answer. I would say this is a step in the right direction. At least they're talking about Bitcoin, but it appears that it's not exactly what the market was hoping for on the short term. While some would say the US appears to be dragging its feet, what are the states doing right now? Well, we have news today that Ohio, for one, their senator introduced the state's second Bitcoin reserve bill. And SB 57 is one of many Bitcoin related bills to be proposed in the state. In December, House Republican leader Derek Marin introduced HB 703, the Ohio Bitcoin Reserve Act, which would give the state treasurer the option to allocate Bitcoin to a reserve fund. You know what's kind of scary is that we even have officials pointing out the debasement of the dollar. The US dollar is being rapidly devalued, and our state treasurer should have the authority and flexibility to invest in Bitcoin when determining proper asset allocation. And we had another bill in September. Ohio Senator Neeraj Antony introduced a bill allowing the state to accept crypto for payment of taxes and fees. And here we have a nice little chart of the US states showing who's getting into Bitcoin. The states colored in blue are all pending, with little Bitcoin logos means an actual strategic Bitcoin reserve, with a somewhat transparent Bitcoin logo meaning a partial strategic Bitcoin reserve. 2 states currently under consideration. Not sure what the difference of pending and under consideration mean. Possibly these are a step ahead of the others, the blue ones, but progress is clearly being made. More and more states are warming up to the idea of some kind of a digital asset reserve, a Bitcoin strategic reserve. Now here's another one from another article talking about Bitcoin strategic reserves and such. This shows the yellow states as active legislation weighing investments. The striped yellow states are officials discussing significant proposals. And the green states are states that are actually investing retirement funds into these Bitcoin ETFs already. If you would have asked any of us, probably any of us last cycle, is the US going to get into a Bitcoin reserve? Is the US going to invest in Bitcoin? Are these states going to invest in Bitcoin? We would have said probably not for a long, long time, but hopefully it's coming one day. Well, this cycle seems like much more of a sure thing. And last cycle, while we were focused on Bitcoin adoption, talking about Tesla getting into Bitcoin, that was basically the highlight. And it's funny that now Tesla is hardly being mentioned, although they do have something like $1 billion worth of Bitcoin still to this day. It's just interesting how things change so much from cycle to cycle. Bitcoin is being adopted. Bitcoin is here to stay. And the companies, states, nations that realize this first are going to benefit the most. I'll end it with this. Despite all this excitement, I do think Bitcoin is still going to follow a 4-year cycle to some extent. I do think future bear markets will not be as severe as we have seen in the past. As cycles progress, we see diminishing returns and we see less of a drop from the bear markets. You might be happy about this. This might be seen as a good thing to some. Bitcoin becoming more stable. There's an argument for Bitcoin becoming more stable, allowing more people to want to invest in it because of its lack of volatility one day. But you know, that volatility is what gives the most gains. That volatility is what brought Bitcoin down to 15,000 in the bear market. That volatility is what gives you more multiples. Something to consider as Bitcoin continues to be adopted worldwide. Something to consider as Bitcoin becomes larger and larger is the returns will be less and less, although still amazing. In my opinion, the cycle is not at the top yet, and there are indicators pointing this out. For one, the pi cycle top indicator. This has been a very accurate indicator before, and when you see this yellow line cross the green line, that's typically a sign that we're topping out. We are not there yet. I do think a big massive move in the future could bring us close. If we get a huge run, break out of that 108 and start working towards 130, towards 150, you want to definitely be keeping an eye on this pi cycle top indicator. There are other indicators to keep an eye on as well, such as the RSI. One thing I'm watching is the RSI on the monthly and weekly. We have seen them higher before. The realized HODL waves, the MVRV-z score. Short-term holders realized profit, terminal price, the puell multiple, active address sentiment, SOPR, or spent output profit ratio, and VDD, value days destroyed, hash ribbons, the 50 MA on the weekly. These are all things you can keep an eye on to help make an informed decision of whether the top is in or not. The indicators are saying the top is not yet in. Having said that, remember, we are getting closer and closer to the end of the 4-year cycle. We are getting closer and closer to the end of the bull run. While I don't think the top is in, when that FOMO hits, you definitely want to secure some profits and prepare some cash. Following the cycle, this would be the year to do so. But what do you think? Do you think the cycle is broken from now on? Or do you think Bitcoin will always follow its 4-year cycle, although possibly in the future to a lesser extent? Thanks as always for watching, guys, and I'll see you tomorrow.